Welcome to Rambam in Depth. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam in Hilchos Korban Pesach, Perek Aleph, Halacha Gimel. The Rambam says as follows: Ein shechten es Pesach ela ba'azara kishar hakodshim. The only place where you could shecht and slaughter a korban Pesach is in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, like all other sacrifices. Then the Rambam adds, Af b'shas heter habamis lo hayim akribin es Pesach bebamas yachid ela bebamas tzibur. Even when there was a period when Jews were allowed to bring sacrifices on a private makeshift altar called a bama, that was the period when after the Jews entered into Eretz Yisrael for the first 14 years of the conquest and the distributing of the land. The Jews were allowed to bring their sacrifices wherever they wanted. Didn't have to be in the Mishkan. Later on, when Shiloh, the temple in Shiloh was built, then prohibited all private sacrifices on private altars. Then, when Shiloh was destroyed, and in between Shiloh and the Beis Hamikdash in Yerushalayim, there was 57 years in which they had a temple in Nov and in Givon. During that 57-year period, you were allowed to bring sacrifices on a bama. After the Beis Hamikdash was built, the Rambam says, based on the Gemara, of course, that from then onward, no one is ever allowed to bring a korban on a bama. It has to be only in the Beis Hamikdash when it will be built imminently. So the Rambam says, even during those periods when a Jew could bring a private sacrifice on a bama, he didn't have to bring it to the bama sibur, the communal sacrifice location, which was either in Gilgal or a Nov in Givon, but on his own bama he could bring private sacrifices, but not a korban Pesach. Even b'shas heter habamais, even when it was permissible to bring sacrifices on a bama, that did not include a korban Pesach. Minchas Chinuch, mitzvah Tov Pei Zayin, asks a very obvious question. Why does the Rambam bring this halacha over here? Once the Beis Hamikdash was built in Yerushalayim, there's never going to be another time, another situation when it is permissible to bring a korban on a bama. So this is irrelevant. The Rambam doesn't bring dinim that are no longer relevant and that will not become relevant when Mashiach comes. So the Rambam includes the laws of sacrifices, even though we can't bring a sacrifice today because the Beis Hamikdash will be rebuilt, they will be resumed. The same thing with all the other halachas that are not in operation now, but they will become effective in operation when Mashiach comes. The Rambam brings those, even though it's not current this very moment. But things that were only in the past and will not become operable, they will not take effect in the future, those are the things the Rambam doesn't bring. So why would he bring the thing about a bama's yachid, that you're allowed to bring a sacrifice in a bama, but you can't bring the korban Pesach? There is no more bama. So the Minchas Chinuch answers, because he has the same question that he asks on the Chinuch, and he says that the Rambam is trying to tell us that if someone does bring a korban Pesach nowadays on a bama, besides the fact that there is a prohibition in general, you're not allowed to bring a sacrifice outside the Beis Hamikdash, any sacrifice. So if you bring any sacrifice on a bama, it would be a violation because it's Isur HaBamis. Bamis are forbidden. But in addition to that prohibition, there'll be an additional lav, an additional negative commandment because it's a korban Pesach, and that, even when it was permissible to bring other sacrifices, you can't bring a korban Pesach. That's the Minchas Chinuch's take. The only question that remains that the Mishnah Lamelech in his comments on the Chinuch asks, and a lot of others ask as well, why doesn't the Rambam list this as a lav, one of the 365 negative commandments, that you're not allowed to bring a korban Pesach in addition to other sacrifices on a bama? Another answer, a contemporary answer, in the Sefer Simchas Melech on the Rambam, he gives a very beautiful, ingenious answer, and it's based on the Rebbe's Sicha. The Rebbe explains, why does the Gemara go into all the dinim of bama when it's no longer going to be in effect? Maida hava hava, what happened in the past happened in the past. So the Rebbe explains first that, well, it is possible to bring a korban on a bama. If a Navi tells you to bring a korban, just like Eliyahu Navi, when they had to test to see that the people who worshiped the Baal, that the Baal was not a true God, he had them bring a korban. They all brought korbanos, outside of Yerushalayim, outside of the Beis Hamikdash. The Beis Hamikdash was then in existence. So the answer is because the Torah tells us, Elav Tishma, that you're supposed to listen to a Navi. If he gives you a one-time suspension of a halacha, the Navi tells you to eat something isn't kosher, a one-time thing for whatever pressing, urgent reason, you're supposed to listen to the Navi. Same thing if the Navi tells you to build a bama and bring a sacrifice, you're supposed to listen. So it is possible to bring a korban on a bama. The Rebbe says that's still very far-fetched and remote because it only happened once in history, Eliyahu Navi. So why would the Gemara go into all the details of bama when you're dealing with a one-time thing? And the fact that there could still be, the Rebbe says there could still be nevuah, that's not a problem, because even though the Gemara says that Nistalka Ruach HaKodesh, when the last three prophets were gone, Chag Eschari and Malachi, but nevertheless the Rebbe shows, and this is the Rambam Shita, that it's just that nevuah is not common. But there could be a Navi with Ruach HaKodesh even today. But still, it's a far-fetched possibility that a Navi will come and tell us to bring a korban on a bama. So the Rebbe then says this shows us, this follows the shita, the approach, that when a person brings a korban on a bama at the behest of a Navi, it's not that he's violating the law, because you have a Navi who tells you have a right to violate the law. The din of bama, the prohibition of bama, from the very outset was based on the stipulation that if a Navi tells you to bring it, then you're allowed to bring it on a bama. In other words, it's a din in a bama that a bama has a heter. There's a time when a bama is permissible. There's a time when a bama is forbidden. One of the times that a bama is permissible is when a Navi tells you. So even though it's not a very likely possibility that is going to happen, but the Gemara discusses a lot of halachas that are not common. So based on that, the Sefer Simchas Melech says that's why the Rambam brings the halacha that you can't bring a korban Pesach on a bama, even b'shas heter bama, is to tell us that even when there's a heter bama, when the dinim of bama themselves allow you to bring a korban Pesach, allow you to bring a korban rather, you can't bring a korban Pesach. So let's say the Navi tells you that for one day only, for this one day, 1 week, you can bring a korban on a bama. You can bring other korbanos, but you can't bring a korban Pesach because that's a separate law. It sounds like a very beautiful explanation. The only problem is that if that's the case, why doesn't the Rambam bring all the halachas of bama? Why does he bring only one halacha of bama, the gabi korban Pesach? Why doesn't he bring all the other halachas of bama? Who can bring on a bama and what the person, whether he has to have bigdei kahuna, so on and so forth, that the Gemara discusses in Zvachim? Why doesn't the Rambam bring the other halachas as well? And if you say, well, it's not common that someone should bring korbanos on a bama, then why bring about the korban Pesach? One could find an answer to that, to distinguish between the halachas of bama, since they're not frequent, they're not common. The Rambam didn't feel he has to bring it. If someone needs to know the halachas of bama, let him go to the Gemara. But a lav, a prohibition, maybe that's different. But still, this needs further iyun, further clarification.